She gestured at the file case I was clutching.
The crap, the nonsense, the bric-a-brac. The Sons of Baal. Why the hell should I review that case? It's dead and nothing. A bunch of fools who were pulled off the Westmoreland pylon in the middle of the night for playing around with geolocators. Woo! I'm so scared. Imagine that. They're measuring us. Do you have any idea what this wardship is like?
Inquisitor General,
Do you? This is Cadia, you silly fool. Cadia! Right on the doorway of chaos. Right in the heart of everything. The seepage of evil is so great, I have 100 active cults to subdue every month. 100! The place breeds recidivists like a pond breeds scum. I sleep 3 or 4 hours a night if I'm lucky. My vox chimes and I'm up, called out to another nest of poison that the RBTs have uncovered. Firefights in the street, Eisenhorn. Running battles with the foot soldiers of the arch-enemy. I can barely keep up with the day-to-day banishments. Forget the past cases my crap-witted predecessor filed. This is Cadia. This is the Gate of the Eye. This is where the bloody work of the Inquisition is done. Don't distract me with stories of some engineering club gone bad.
My apologies.
Taken. See yourselves out.
She limped away. Neve? She turned. I dropped the file case onto the reading table. They might have been idiots, I said, but they're the only solid link I have to a demon host that could destroy us all.
A demon host?
She said. That's right. And the beast that controls it. A beast that, if I'm right, is one of ours. She lurched back down the archivum.
Convince me, she said.
Chapter 13. A reunion. War bells. The long, slow task begins. I don't know if I did convince the Inquisitor General. I don't know if I could. But she heard me out and stayed around for another 2 hours, helping to locate the files of connected cases and other materials. Past 9, she was called away to a disturbance on an island community in the Caducades. Before she left, she offered accommodation for me and my staff in the Minster, which I politely declined, and made it clear that I had her permission to continue my investigation in Kazet-Derth, provided I kept her informed.
I've heard stories about your adventures, Eisenhorn. I don't want anything like that happening on my turf. Do we understand each other?
We do.
Good night, then. And good hunting.
Fishig and I were left alone in the archivum. You were wrong, I told him.
How's that?
I did like her.
Ha! That hard-nosed bitch.
Actually, I liked her because she was a hard-nosed bitch. I always took pleasure in meeting a fellow Inquisitor who conducted their work fairly and seriously, even if their methods differed from mine. Neve was a thoroughbred Puritan and lacked patience. She was abrupt to the point of rudeness. She was overworked, but she called things as she saw them, despised sloppiness, and took the threats to our society and way of life completely seriously. In my opinion, there was no other way for an Inquisitor to behave. We worked on until midnight, studying and collating the contents of hundreds of case files. By then, the gun cutter had arrived from the landing fields at Kazet-Tyrock in response to my Vox summons. Fishig found one of Neve's rubricators and charged him with making data slate copies of the most promising files ready for our return in the morning. Then we got back into the speeder and flew through the Castellum's zigzag streets to the town field. The stars were out, and it was cool. Noctule moths fluttered around the landing lights of the waiting cutter. There was a mauve smudge in the night sky, down low over the eastern horizon. The rising nebula of the Eye of Terror. Even from this great distance, just a blur in the heavens, it put a chill into me. If the two-headed eagle symbolizes all that is good and noble and right about the imperium of mankind, that rancid blur symbolized all that was abominable about our eternal foe. Laughter and warm voices greeted Fishig as we went aboard. Amos shook him repeatedly by the hand, and Beckwin planted a quick kiss on his cheek that made him blush. He exchanged a few playful put-downs with Nail and Medea, and asked Hussman if he was hungry. "Why?" the scout hunter asked. his eyes widening in anticipation.
"Because it's supper time," said Fishig. "Betancourt, get this crate into the air."
We were going to that safe place he had mentioned. I had not been aboard the Sprint Trader SN for some 5 years. A classic Isolde-pattern bulk clipper, the ship was like a space-going cathedral, 3 kilometers long, and looked as majestic holding low anchor above Cadia as it had when I first saw it, nearly 100 years before, in the cold orbit of Hubris. Medea coasted us in towards the cargo hatch of the gigantic craft.
"A rogue trader?"
asked Inchabel cautiously, looking over my shoulder at the ship ahead. "An old friend," I reassured him. Shipmaster Tobias Maxilla was, I suppose, my most unlikely ally. He'd made his living shipping luxury goods officially, and unofficially, along the space lanes of the Helican subsector. He still did. He was a merchant, he maintained, to any that asked. But he had a pirate's taste for adventure, a yearning for the halcyon days of early spacefaring. I had hired his ship during the affair of the Necrotuke, to provide nothing more than transport for my team, but he had got involved, with increasing glee, and he'd stayed involved ever since. Every few years over the last century, I had hired him to run passage for me or some of my staff, or he had contacted me to ask if his services were needed, just because he was bored, just because he was in the neighborhood. Maxilla was an educated, erudite man, with a subtle wit and a taste for the finest things in life. He was also a charming host and a good companion, and I liked him immensely. He was in no way a formal part of my staff, but he was, I suppose, after all this time and all those shared adventures, a vital part. The year before, when it had been decided that Fishig would embark on this long chase after the Cadian leads, I had asked Maxilla to provide him with transportation for as long as it was needed. He had agreed at once, and not because of the generous fee I was offering. To him, it sounded like a true adventure. Besides, it promised a chance to give the old SN a proper long run out, beyond its normal route of the Helican stars. A genuine voyage, an odyssey. That was what Tobias Maxilla lived for. He was waiting in the cargo hold to greet us, even before the extractor vents had finished dumping out the cutter's thruster fumes. He had dressed for the occasion, as was his way. A blue velvet balmacan with huge sleeves and a jabot collar. A peascod doublet of Japanagar silk. Patent leather sabatons with gold buckles, and a stupendous fantail hat perched on his powdered periwig. His face was skin-dyed white and set with an emerald beauty spot. His cologne was stronger than the thruster fumes.
"My dear, dear Gregor," he cried,
striding forward and taking my proffered hands with both of his.
"A signal joy to have you back aboard our humble craft."
"Tobias, a pleasure, as always."
"And dear Elizabeth, looking younger and more fragrant than ever."
He clasped her hand and kissed her cheek.
"Steady now, you'll smudge
your makeup."
"Wise Amos, welcome, savant."
Amos just chuckled as his hand was shaken. I don't think he ever knew quite what to make of Maxilla.
"Mr. Nail."
"Maxilla."
"And Medea, ravishing, quite ravishing."
"You certainly are," Medea said playfully, allowing one of her circuit-inlaid hands to be kissed.
"You knew we were coming, Maxilla. You might have smartened up a bit," said Fishig.
Amid laughter, they shook hands. I realized their relationship had changed. They had been together for a year on this mission. Fishig had never really connected with Maxilla. Their backgrounds and lives were too divergent, but clearly a year in each other's company had brokered a true friendship at last. That pleased me too. An Inquisitor's band works better when it is close-knit. Maxilla turned to Husman and Inchabel.
"You two I don't know, but I will, as that's what dinners are for. Welcome to the SN."
Maxilla's sculptural gold servitors, each one a work of art, had prepared a late supper for us in the grand dining lounge. A pâté zéphyr of crab, fresh from the caducades that morning, ontol flowers poivrées in their husks, fillets of Cadian boar hongrois, followed by an ebon fruit talmousse with cream and Intian syrup. The gilded sommelier served pétillant Samatan rosé, heavy-bodied Cadian claret, a sweet and sticky tokay from a lowland kloss on hydrophore, and stinging shots of Mordian schnapps. Our humours were good, and the impromptu supper gave us time to step back from the work at hand and relax. None of us spoke of the case or the demands that it was likely to make of us. To rest the mind often clears it. I was going to need clarity now. We returned to ck3 the next morning in the gun cutter. The steel dawn over the wide island group of the caducades was cut by the rising edge of a burning red sun. As we swept in over the craggy mainland, the peaks and edges of the moors were caught with a pink alpenglow. Despite the fact that we were broadcasting the correct clearances, we were challenged 6 times in the half-hour descent. At one point, a pair of Cadian marauders rolled in and flanked us as they checked us over. Military security dominated the Cadian way of life. Every non-military transport, shuttle and starship, was placed under acute observation, especially those that behaved suspiciously or wandered from the authorized flight routes. Amos told me that a pinnace carrying the Deacon of Arnush, visiting Cadia for a promulgation seminar, had been shot down over the Sea of Kansk 6 months earlier, simply because it failed to give the correct codes. It made me wonder how our unknown foe had got his minions on and off Cadia. Unless, like us, he had an identity and a rank that easily turned aside routine security checks. We were diverted 60 kilometers west of ck3 because a war was going on. The dawn light was filled with the flashes and light streaks of a mass rocket attack. 8 regiments of Cadian shock, just a few days away from shipping out to a tour of duty on one of the inner fortress worlds of the Cadian Gate, were staging a live firing exercise. We finally set down on the Minster's launch pad over an hour late. The war bells in every tower and chatravy in the Khazar were ringing to signal that the roar of battle from the nearby plains and moors was just a practice. We divided our efforts. Fishig took Amos to the Minster's archivum to study the records we had ordered copied the night before and do further research. Bequin, escorted by Husman, went to search the stacks of the Ecclesiarchy's records in the Apostolaeum. Inchabel and Nail visited the Administratum's catalogue of records. I went with Medea to the Ministry of Interior Defence. There are no arbites on Cadia. A permanent state of martial law governs the world, and, as a result, all civil policing duties are overseen by the Interior Guard, a sub-office of the Cadian Imperial Guard itself. In ck3, the region's administrative capital, their headquarters is the Ministry of Interior Defence, a grey stone donjon adjoining the fortress of the Martial Governor, right at the heart of ck3. Members of the Interior Guard are chosen at random. Worldwide, 1 in every 10 soldiers recruited into the Cadian forces is transferred into the Interior Force at the end of basic and preparatory, whatever their achievements and promise. As a result, some of the most able troopers ever raised on this planet of warriors serve out their time on the home world itself, and Cadia boasts one of the most effective and skilled planetary defence forces of any imperial world. We were seen by Colonel Ibbett, a powerful, lean man in his 40s who looked like he should have been leading the charge into the Eye of Terror. He was courteous, but mistrustful. "We have no files on illegal or suspect immigration." "Why is that, Colonel?" "Because it doesn't happen. The system does not permit it." "Surely there are unfortunate exceptions." Ibbett, his grey and white camoed uniform, starched and pressed so sharply you could have cut yourself on the creases, steepled his fingers. "All right, then," I said, changing tack. "What if someone wanted to get onto the planet anonymously? How could that be managed?" "It couldn't," he said. He wasn't giving at all. "Every identity and visit purpose is logged and filed, and any infractions quickly dealt with." "Then I'll start with the files annotating those infractions." Resignedly, Ibbett showed us into a codifier room and assigned us a military clerk to take us through the records. We sorted and checked for about 3 hours, slowly becoming bored with the interminable lists of orbital boardings, airspace interceptions, and ground-based raids. I could tell that a thorough review of these records alone was going to take weeks. So that's what we did. We spent 10.5 weeks scouring the archives and catalogues of ck3, working in shifts and living out of the quarters on the gun cutter. Every few days we returned to the SN for a little rest and reflection. It was the dead of winter by the time we were finished. Chapter 14. Winter brings a chance. The damned has a name. The pylon at Kazergesh. Wintertide on Cadia. There had been glinting ice floes in the gunmetal waters of the caducades that morning, and light snow had fallen on the moors. At that time of year, the foul corona of the Eye of Terror was visible even during the fleeting hours of daylight. The unholy mauve radiance of the nights became a violet fuzz in the cold daylight, like a badly blotted ink stain on white paper. It made us feel like we were under surveillance all the time. The eye, bloodshot, angry, peering down at us. Worst of all were the moor winds, cold and sharp as a Cadian's bayonet, blowing down from Arctic latitudes. The high lakes were all frozen now, and lethal pogo-nip fogs haunted the bitter heaths and uplands. In the Cassia itself, it seemed like the locals had a morbid fear of heaters or window insulation. Chilly gales breathed down the hallways of the Minster and the Administratum building. Water froze in the pipes. Despite it all, the war bells sounded every few days, and the moors rolled with the sounds of winter manoeuvres. I began to imagine that the Cadians were simply shooting at each other to keep warm. 10.5 long, increasingly cold weeks after we had begun our systematic search of the Cassier's records, I was making my now habitual morning walk from the Minster of the Inquisition to the headquarters of the Interior Guard. I wore a thick fur coat against the cold and spike-soled boots to combat the sheet ice on the roads. I was miserable. The search had left us all pale and edgy, too many fruitless hours spent in dark rooms. There had been so many promising leads, links and traces of the Sons of Baal, unauthorized starship traffic, suspicious excise logs. They had all dwindled away into nothing. As far as we could make out, no living member of the Sons of Baal or any living associate or family member remained. There had been no pylon-related cult activity, not even registered xeno-archaeological work. I had interviewed specialist professors at the Universitari and certain tech priests from the Mechanicus who were shown in the records as having expert knowledge of the pylons. Nothing. With Inchabel, Nail, or Fishig, I had travelled the region as far afield as ck3 and ck4. A worker in the gun shops of ck4, who had been identified as a Baal cult member, turned out to simply have the same name, misfiled. A wasted 10-hour round trip by speeder. Amos had constructed a codifier model by which we checked record anomalies against the timetable of past cult activity. There seemed to be no correlation at all. I walked up the steps of the Ministry of Interior Defence and submitted myself to the clearance check in the postern guardhouse. It should have been a formality. I had been arriving at the same time almost every day for the last 75. I even recognized some of the guardsmen by sight. But, still, it was like the first time I had ever been there. Papers were not only stamped, but read thoroughly and run through an anti-counterfeit auspex. My rosette was scrutinized and tagged. The duty officer voxed my details through to the main building to get authorization. "Doesn't this ever bore you?" I asked one of the desk officers as I waited, folding my papers back into my leather wallet. "Doesn't what bore me, sir?" he asked. I hadn't seen Ibit since the first week. I'd been rotated between a number of supervisors. One told me it was because of shift changes, but I knew it was because none of them liked to deal with an inquisitor, especially a persistent one. That morning it was Major Revel who escorted me in. Revel, a surly young man, was new to me. "How can I assist you, sir?" he asked curtly. I sighed. Open logbooks and data slates were piled around the workstation where I had abandoned them the night before. Revel was already calling for a clerk to tidy them away and make space for me before I could explain that I'd made the mess in the first place. He looked at me warily. "You've been here before?" I sighed again. I had 2 hours. At 11, I was due to meet Inchabel and Bequin and fly out to a village on one of the islands in the Caducades to investigate a rumor that a man there knew something about smuggling. Another waste of time, I was sure. I started in on the air traffic daybook, reading through the lists of orbital transfers for a summer day 2 years earlier. Halfway down the slate was an entry showing a shuttle transfer from an orbiting ship to a landing field near Kazer Gesh. Gesh was near to one of the pylons frequented by the Sons of Baal. Moreover, on checking, I realized the date put it 3 days before the last incident of cult activity at the pylon. I stoked up the data engine and requested further information on the entry. I was immediately denied. I used a higher decrypt key and was shown a report that withheld both the name of the ship and the source of its authority. I began to get excited and scrolled down. Even the purpose of the visit was restricted. Now I typed in the teeth of my highest decrypt key. The terminal throbbed and chattered, sorting through files and authorizations. The name came up. My elation peaked and plunged away. Neve. The mysterious entry had been a record of a classified mission by the Inquisitor General. Back to square one. The island was cold and bare. A small fishing community clung to the rim of the western bay. Inchabel swung the speeder down onto the cobbled tideway where spread nets had gone stiff with ice. "How much longer, Gregor?" Beckwin asked me, winding her scarf around her throat. "How much longer what?" "Until we give up and leave. I'm so sick of this fate-forsaken world." I shrugged. "Another week? Until Candlemas. If we hadn't found anything by then, I promise we'll say goodbye to Cadia." The three of us trudged up the icy walk to a grim tavern overlooking the sea wall. Anchorfish, as tall as men, were hung outside, salted and drying in the winter air. The barman didn't want to know us, but his steward brought us drinks and led us through to a back parlour. He admitted that he had sent the message about the smuggler. The smuggler was here to meet us, he said. We entered the back parlour. A man sat by the roaring grate, warming his jewelled fingers at its flames. I smelled cologne. "Good morning, Gregor," said Tobias Maxilla. Despite the shouting coming from the back parlour, the steward brought us herb omelettes and bowls of steaming czarfin broth, along with a bottle of fortified wine. "Are you going to explain?" asked Inchabel tersely. "Of course, dear Nathan, of course," Maxilla replied, pouring a careful measure of wine into each glass. "Be patient." "Now, Tobias," I snapped. "Oh," he said, seeing my look. He sat back. "I confess I have become despondent these last few weeks. You've been so busy, and I've just been waiting up there on the SN. Well, anyway, you've said a number of times that the answer you're searching for depended on one key thing. It depended on you establishing a way of getting past this dire planet's obsessively tight security. Anonymously. And I said to myself, Tobias, that's what you do, even though Gregor doesn't like to think about it. Smuggling, Tobias, is your forte. So I decided to see if I could smuggle myself down here. And guess what?" He sat back, sipping his glass, looking disgustingly pleased with himself. "You smuggled yourself onto the planet to prove it could be done?" asked Beckwin slowly. He nodded. "My shuttle's hidden in the spinneys behind the village. It's amazing how many zipped mouths and blind eyes you can buy with a purse of hard cash round here." "I don't know what to say," I said. He made an open-handed gesture. "You told me weeks ago that the Interior Guard recognized no illegal or suspect immigration. Well, I'm here today, literally, to prove that claim wrong. Cadia's a tough nut to crack, I'll admit. One of the toughest I've faced in a long and naughty career. But not impossible, as you see." I sank my wine in a single gulp. "I should sever my links with you for this, Tobias. You know that." "Oh, pooh, Gregor. Because I've shown up the Cadian Interior Guard as a bunch of fools? Because you've broken the law." No, I haven't. Bent it, possibly, but not broken it. My presence here is entirely legal, under both Cadian local and Imperial general law." "What?" "Come on, my old friend. Why do you think my shuttle wasn't blasted out of the heavens this morning by eager Cadian lightning jockeys? That was a rhetorical question, by the way. Answer. Because when the interceptors came scrambling up to meet me, I broadcast the right security clearance, and that contented them. But the day codes are privileged. The counterchecks are triple. They are issued only to those with appropriately high credentials. What authority could you possibly have used to get them?" "Well, Gregor, yours, of course." It had been staring me in the face, and it took the grandstanding flamboyance of Maxilla, in his very worst showing-off mode, to reveal it. The reason the Interior Guard had no file on illegal or suspect immigration was because there was nothing of that nature to file. Those that tried to run the strict gauntlet of Cadian security and failed died. The ones that got through were never noticed, because they were using high-level security clearances, masquerading as the sort of official visitor who would not be stopped. People like me. People like Neve.
"I never made this trip,"
Neve said, staring steadily at the data slate I was showing her.
This?
Of course not. But someone borrowed your authority code, used it to gain trans-orbital access. That's how they were getting in. Look here, your code again, and again. And before that, the code headers of your predecessor, Gonfal. It goes back 40 years, each and every flurry of activity from the Sons of Baal, and other cults, can be matched by space-to-surface transfers cleared as genuine Inquisition flights.
Emperor, protect me!
Neve looked up. She put down the data slate and called hoarsely for a servitor to bring more lights into her octastyle sanctum.
But my authority code is protected. How was it stolen? Eisenhorn, yours was used to prove this. How was that stolen?
I paused. It wasn't, not exactly. One of my associates borrowed it to prove the point.
Why doesn't that surprise me? Oh, no matter, Eisenhorn. There's a great deal of difference between you and me. You may have rogue elements in your band who act behind your back in unorthodox, unilateral ways. I do not. My code could not have been abused so.
I accept your point, but it could. Who has access to your code?
No one. No one below me.
But above you?
What?
I said this could be one of ours. A senior Inquisitor. A Grand Master, even. Certainly a wily veteran with enough clout to pull the right strings.
That would require a direct override at the highest levels.
Exactly. Let's look. In the end, that was my adversary's downfall. All the blood and fury and combat we had gone through was as nothing to this prosaic clue that revealed his identity. To steal Neve's authority code, and the authority codes of her predecessors, my adversary had been forced to use the clout of his own identity to get into the files. The record of that operation was encrypted, of course. Sitting side by side at the codifier in her sanctum's annex, Neve and I quickly found it. It wasn't even hidden. He never thought anyone would look. But still, it was encrypted. The cryptology was beyond both me and Neve. But together, combining our ranks, we could request, via the Astropathicus, permission to use the Inquisition's most powerful decryption keys. It took 5 hours to approve our joint rating. Just after midnight, a scribe from the Officio Astropathicus brought us the message slate. Midwinter winds shook the sanctum's casements. I was alone with Neve. We had felt it inappropriate to have company. This was a matter of the gravest import. We had talked of this and that to pass the time, though both of us were restless and edgy. She poured generous glasses of Cadian glaver, which took the edge off the cold. Her aide announced the scribe, and he entered, bowing low, his augmetic chassis grinding beneath his robes. He held out a slate to her, clutched in the mechadendrites that served as his hand. Neve took it and dismissed him. I rose and put down my barely touched glass of spirits. Neve limped over to me, leant on her silver crutch, and held up the slate.
"Shall we?"
she asked. We went into the annex and loaded the slate into the ancient codifier. The limpid green display shifted feverishly with runes. She opened the file we were after and set the key to work. It took a moment or two. Then the identity of the veteran who had used his power to manipulate Neve's code was revealed on the small, green-washed screen. At last, the damned had a name. It shocked even me.
"Glory from above,"
breathed Inquisitor General Neve.
"Quixos."
Amos was arguing with Neve's chief savant, Kutch.
"Quixos is dead, long dead," Kutch maintained. "This is clearly a case of someone using his authority. Quixos is still registered as living by the annals of the Inquisition. As an oversight, no body has ever been retrieved, no proof of death." "Precisely. But still, there has been no sign or word from Quixos for over 100 years.
"None that we've seen," I said.
"Eisenhorn's right," Neve said. "Inquisitor Utlin was presumed dead for over 70 years. Then he reappeared overnight to bring down the tyrants of Equesta II.
"It's most perturbatory," Amos muttered. Quixos. Quixos the Great. Quixos the Bright. One of the most revered inquisitors ever to roam the Imperium. His early texts had been required reading for all of us. He was a legend. At the age of just 21, he had burned the demons out of Artem. Then he had purged the Endorian subsector of its false goat gods. He had transcribed the Book of Ebon. He had broken the wretched subcult of Nurgle that had tainted one of the palaces of Terra itself. He had tracked down and killed the Chaos Marine Banegloss. He had silenced the whisperers of Domactoni. He had crucified the Witch King of Sarpeth on the battlements above his incinerated hive. But there had always been an odour about Quixos, a hint that he was too close to the evil he prosecuted. He was a radical, certainly. Some amongst the Ordos said he was a rogue. Others said, in low, private voices, much worse. To me, he was a great man who had perhaps gone too far. I simply honoured his memory and his achievements, because, as far as I had been concerned, he was long dead.
Could he still be alive?
Neve asked.
Madam, not at all,
Kutch began. I don't know why you employ him, I said, pointing dismissively at the Cadian savant. His advice isn't sound.
Well, really,
Kutch huffed.
Shut up and go away,
Neve told him. She stalked across to me and took my empty glass from me.
Go on, then. Your opinion?
You want it? From an adventurer like me? Are you sure, Inquisitor General? She thrust a topped-up glass of glaver into my hand, so hard it sloshed.
Just give me your damned opinion.
I sipped. Amos was staring over at me nervously from the settle by the door. Quixos could be very much alive. He'd be... What now, Amos?
342, sir.
Right. Well, that's no age, is it? Not given augmetics or rejuvenat drugs. Or sorcery.
Damn it,
Neve said. He's an incredibly gifted individual, as his career testifies. He has a reputation, however unwarranted, for straying too far to the radical side. He has dabbled with the warp. We can say that much. Just because we've heard nothing of him these last 100 or more years doesn't mean he isn't still active.
And that activity?
Neve smacked the tip of her crutch down twice on the tiled floor.
What? What? Utilizing demon hosts, perverting inquisitors, hunting for abominated texts like your Necrochuk, triggering the dreadful atrocity of Thracian?
Perhaps. Why not?
Because that would make him a monster. The exact antithesis of everything our order is about.
Well, yes, it would. It's happened before. A powerful man who gets so close to the evil he has sworn to combat, he gets dragged into it. Inquisitor Ruberu, for example.
Yes, Ruberu, I know.
Grandmaster Durkon.
Granted, I remember.
Cardinal Palfro of Mimica, Saint Boniface, also called the Death's Head of 1,000 Tears, intoned Amos.
For the Emperor's sake.
High Lord Van Dyer, I suggested.
All right.
Horus? Amos dared to whisper. There was a long silence.
Great Quixos,
Neve murmured, slowly turning to face me.
Will he be added to that unholy list? Is one of our greatest to be condemned so?
If he must be, I replied.
What do we do? She asked.
We find him. We find out if the passing centuries have truly changed him into the being we fear he is. And if they have, Emperor, pardon me, we declare him heretic and extremis diabolus, and we destroy him for his crimes. Neve sat down hard, staring into her glass. There was a knock at the sanctum's door, which Amos answered. It was Fishig.
Sir, madam,
he said, acknowledging Neve. Well, Fishig?
Further to your discoveries today, we have been monitoring inter-orbit traffic. 2 hours ago, a craft made planetfall at Kasha-Gesh. It cleared Cadian airspace using the Inquisitor General's authority code.
Gesh was the site of the last known cult activity. I gathered up my coat. With your permission, Inquisitor General. Neve rose with me, her face set hard.
With your permission, Inquisitor Eisenhorn, I'd like to come with you.
Kasha-Gesh was 3 hours' flight from Kasha-Dearth. Cruel winter had blown in from the upland heaths, and the gun cutter was vibrating its way against powerful ice storms. My band was all aboard, preparing weapons. So was Inquisitor General Neve and a 6-man squad of Cadian elite shock, impassive troopers in winter camo armour, prepping matte white las rifles and stubbers in the crew bay.
God throne, they're tough-ass bastards, Nail muttered to me as I passed him coming out of the bay. Impressed? Scared is more like it. Regular Cadian is soldier enough for me. These are elite. The elite of the elite. The Khazarkin. The what? It wasn't like an experienced fighter to show deference to other fighting men. The Khazarkin. The Cadian best. And you can imagine what that means. Holy Terra. They're stone killers. How do you know? Oh, please, look at their necks. The Caducade Sea Eagle brand. Come to that, just look at their necks. I've seen slimmer trees. Good thing they're on our side, I said. I bloody hope so, Nail returned, and moved forward. The deck lurched again. I walked back down the bay, steadying myself on the overhead hand loops, and approached Neve. She was dressed in Cadian mesh armor and was adjusting her winter hood. I saw she had exchanged her silver crutch for a lift-assisted cane fitted with a compact cylindrical grenade launcher. In my fur coat and body glove armor, I felt underdressed. Your usual attire? I asked.
Necessary clothing. You should come out with me sometime. Cult hunting in the islands after dark.
My staff are worried. These men are Khazarkin?
Yes.
Their reputation precedes them.
So did yours.
Good point. But anyway, Neve looked round at the row of Cadian elite.
Captain ep5,
she shouted, raising her voice above the roar of the buffet and the thrusters. Inquisitor General, ma'am, said the warrior on the end.
Inquisitor Eisenhorn wants reassurance that you are the best of the best and will be careful to watch the backsides of him and his band.
6 snow-visored faces turned to look at me. We've logged the biospores of you and your company into our sighting auspexes, sir, ep5 announced to me. We couldn't shoot them now, even if we wanted to. Make sure you don't. My staff and I will be leading the way in. The situation may not call for firepower. If it does, the Vox or Psyker command is Rosethorn. Vox channel is Gamma 98. Are you prepared for a psychic summons? We are prepared for anything, ep5 told me. The gun cutter stopped shaking. We've come out of the storm, Medea voxed me. A moment later, she crackled, I see approach lights. Khazar-Geth landing field in 2. The pylon stood 3 kilometers outside the earthworks of Khazar-Geth. The night was clear and glassy, with a heaven full of stars. The Eye of Terror throbbed dimly at the top of the sky. It seemed to me more lurid and brighter than ever before. Somewhere up there, I knew, orbital detachments of the Cadian Interior Guard were hunting the hidden starship from which the visitors to Khazar-Geth had come. Neve had scrambled them before we left, with strict orders not to move until we had engaged on the ground. We didn't want our visitors tipped off. My team moved in, up through the frost-caked scrub of the moorland slope. The pylon was simply a black, oblong absence of stars. I could hear it moaning. I slid out my main weapon, a storm bolter which I had sprayed green in memory of the prize sidearm I had lost somewhere on Echan. May Librarian Britnoth forgive me. This storm gun was slightly larger and more powerful, but nothing like so well engineered as the bolt pistol I had treasured. On my hip I wore a Cadian hanger, a short, curved, twin-edged saber that replaced my beloved power sword. It was just a simple piece of sharp steel, but I'd had the hierarchs at the Ministorum of Khazar-Dirth make some modifications. Still, in truth, I felt vulnerable going up that slope. Nail was to my left, fielding a combat cannon. Husband to my right, with his trustworthy long las. Inchabel was to his right, armed with a brace of antique las pistols that had belonged to Inquisitor Roban. Fishig, hefting an old and trusted RBT's issue riot gun, had gone wide to the far left. Bequin, a long-barreled auto pistol in her gloved hand, was right beside me. Behind us, Neve and her Khazarkin lurked, waiting for my signal. Amos was aboard the gun cutter with Medea, hovering above the drop point, lights killed. They, rather than Neve and her elite, were my reassurance. What do you see? I voxed. Nothing, replied Hussman and Nail. I've got an angle into the seat of the pylon, said Inchabel. I see lights. Confirm that, crackled Fishig, wide to the left. There are men down there. I count 8, no, 10, 12 portable lights. They've got machines. Machines? Handheld. Auspexes.
Measuring again,
Neve whispered over the link. I'm sure, I said. Then I said, in glossier, Thorn eyes flesh. Rapturous beasts at hand. Aegis to arms, crucible. All points cowled. Razor, Taurus pathway, pattern, ebony. My storm gun made a loud click as I racked it. The robed men working in the floodlights around the foot of the pylon froze and slowly turned from their work to look at me. I walked down from the moor through the ice-stiffened bracken, bracing my gun in a pose that could kill any one of them. Beckwin followed me up a few steps behind, her pistol held loosely, ready to swing up. I knew we were covered by Hussman, Inchabel, Nail, and Fischig. "Who is the leader here?" I asked, panning my weapon around.
I am,
said one of the robed figures. "Step forward and identify yourself," I said.
To whom?
I raised the rosette plainly in my left hand. Imperial Inquisition. Some of the robed men moaned with dismay. The leader did not. He stepped forward. I could suddenly smell a cold metallic scent, one that was not new to me. A warning that came too late. The leader slowly drew back his cowl. His angular, cruel head was hairless, and a cold blue light shone out through his skin. Sharpened, steel-tipped horns sprouted from his brow. His eyes were white slits. A demon host. "Cherubael," I said, foolishly. Stupidly. "Your witless ally is not here, Eisenhorn," said the being, baring his teeth and gleaming with light. "My name is Profanity." Chapter 15. Rosethorn. What Cadians are born for. The last thing I expected. There were two ways for this to go. The first was for me to continue talking, and still be talking when the demon host killed me and tossed my smoking corpse on the piled bodies of my comrades. The second was for me to say Rosethorn and place my trust in the mettle of my supporters and the ever-vigilant gaze of the Holy God-Emperor. I said Rosethorn. The thing, Profanity, was stepping towards me. I shot at it with my storm gun, watching in horrid fascination as it caught the white-hot bolt rounds out of the air in its outstretched hands, like a man idly catching slow-tossed racquetballs. The bolts dulled to an ember red in its palms, and it tossed them aside. But its entire attention was on me. Its mistake. Hussman's first hot-shot round cracked into the side of its head and snapped its skull around. As it was reeling, its robes were ripped across by double las pistol fire from Inchabel. Then Fischig's riot gun roared and knocked it down in the brittle bracken. Fischig liked to spend his free time hand-moulding the shot for his riot gun's cartridges. Every pellet was silver and stamped with a sacred sigil of warding that I had taught him long ago. Profanity writhed in agony, the blessed buckshot burning into its flesh. It started to rise, wrathful and frenzied, but a grinding whir rose from my left, a sound like a circular saw running up to speed. Nail's cycling drum cannon raked the demon host and the earth around it, doing hideous damage. The blizzard of shots twisted it, ripping off one of its legs at the knee and the fingers off its left hand. Eldritch power, white cold like frost, spurted from its wounds like lava and burned the soil. The other cultists were moving now, pulling weapons and firing wildly into the night, the place lit up with shooting. Lasfire came from behind us, startlingly close, whipping past our elbows and shoulders. Two of the cultists crumpled, one of them smashing over some of the erected floodlights. Ekbar and his Kazakin charged in past us to engage. In truth, I may say now that they were somehow more terrifying than the demon host, for Profanity was a supernatural thing, and one expected it to be horrifying. The Kazakin were just men. It made their actions all the more astonishing. 6 white blurs, they fell upon the cultists, las guns barking at close range. They wasted no shots. 1 shot, 1 kill. A cultist fled past me, and a Kazakin swung to bring him down. His weapon refused to fire as its sight auspex detected my biospore in the range field. A second later, I was no longer blocking the shot, and the weapon spat. The fleeing cultist tumbled over, headlong in the brush. More cultists had emerged from the other side of the pylon, and I could hear rapid exchanges of gunfire in that direction. Nail's combat cannon was making its distinctive metallic whir between bursts of fire. Inchabel's las cracks overlapped themselves. "Fishig," I yelled. "Lead off round the back of the pylon. See what you can find. Maybe take a damn prisoner before the Kazakhin slay them all." I turned back to deal with the ruined demon host. We had punished it badly, but I had no illusions as to its resilience. Or rather, I had thought I hadn't. Profanity was already gone, the ground still smoking and congealing where it had lain. Damn! Damn! Neve limped down the slope to me. "Eisenhorn? The demon host! Did you see it?" She shook her head. A loud explosion rolled from the far side of the pylon.
You killed it, didn't you?
"Not even slightly," I replied. "Gregor!" Beckwin shrieked. Profanity was behind me, hanging in the air, incandescent with power. It was naked and wore the terrible wounds we had inflicted like medals. The right leg, frayed at the knee, dribbled glowing white ichor. Entry wounds and burns bubbled and smoked across its chest. Its head hung slack on a neck broken by Hussmann's hotshot. It spread its arms, and a hand that was just a thumb and a mangled palm sprayed lightning into the midnight grass. "Nice try," the slack head gurgled. With its robe gone, I could see its body was strung with chains, padlocks, and bindings. Stitching needles and other iron awls were pierced into its luminous flesh. Various amulets hung from the chains, or from the barbed wire looped around its neck. "Run," I said to Neve and Beckwin. "Run!" Neve raised her silver cane and triggered the launcher. The grenade hit Profanity in the lower torso and blew it back a few meters with a flash of physaline. It rushed back towards us, moaning and chattering in a warp-cursed language. Beckwin grabbed both me and Neve. Her untouchable quality was our only defense now, and she knew it. Profanity stopped short of us, just a meter or so away, hovering in the air and shining like a star. I could smell the rank stench of eternal murder about it. Its broken neck made a sound like snapping twigs as it slowly turned its lolling head to look at us. The light of dead suns billowed from its eyes and mouth. Beckwin's fingers bit into my arm. The three of us looked up at it, hair ruffled by the warp winds it generated.
"Tenacious," it said. "No wonder Cherubael likes you. He said you employed untouchables. A wise move. You can't hurt me with your guns, but with her around, I can't touch you with my mind. Fortunately, I don't have to," it added.
It lashed out suddenly with its maimed hand. Neve shrieked as she was hurled aside. There was blood on Profanity's thumb talon. Elizabeth's psychic deadness blocked its psychic rage, but not its physical assault. It lashed out again, and I leapt back, dragging Beckwin. Profanity cackled. "Elizabeth!" I yelled, and grabbed her by the hand. "Stay with me!" I drew my hanger. The short, curved blade shone in Profanity's glare. The runes inscribed on the blade by the Ministorum glittered. I swung hard, skilllessly and frantic, the blade of the hunting sword biting into its rib meat. It howled and flew back, smoke issuing from the gash. I circled, hanger in my right hand, Beckwin clinging to my left.
"You've done your homework. Pentagrammatic runes on your blade. A nice touch. They hurt." It lunged at me. "But nothing like the hurt you will feel."
Elizabeth screamed. She fell, and I struggled to hold onto her hand. If our contact broke, I would feel the full force of the demon host's power. I blocked with my falcate blade, shredding the flesh off the left part of its chest, exposing the ribs. Its talons ripped into my left shoulder and down my flank, ripping my body armor into tatters. Blood cascaded down inside my clothes. I swung again, trying for a Uin Ulsar. It gripped my blade fast in its one good hand. Smoke rose from the clamping fist around the blade. It clenched its teeth in pain.
"The wards hurt, but they are no stronger than the weapon. You should learn to make your weapon sounder next time. Not that there will be a next time," it added.
The hanger had become so hot, I let it go with a howl. Profanity tossed the buckled molten steel aside. It had burned its hand terribly, but it didn't seem to notice.
"Now comes death,"
it said, reaching for me. The next few seconds are burned in my memory. I will never see such heroism again, I am sure. Captain Ekbar and 2 of his Kazakhin troopers assaulted Profanity from the rear. Their las guns wouldn't fire because Beckwin and I were in their range field. Ekbar body tackled the demon host, smashing it away from us. Profanity hurled him aside, and then incinerated the second Kazakin mid-leap with its eyes. The third jammed his Cadian bayonet up to the hilt in Profanity's breastbone. Fire exploded back from the wound, down the trooper's arm, and engulfed him. He fell back screaming as Ekbar came in again, a ragged hole in his cheek and throat. His knife, clenched double-handed, split Profanity open down the backbone. The warp energies that boiled out blew Ekbar apart. Screaming, Profanity writhed away through the air. I knew it wasn't dead. I knew it couldn't really die. But the Cadian elite had given me an opening by sacrificing their lives. They had fallen in the service of the God Emperor, which is what every Cadian is born to do. Aegis! By Scarlet Inferno! Thorn Redux! I screamed the words into my vox, clinging on to Beckwin's hand. Profanity came hurtling towards us. Lights blazing, the gun cutter surged in overhead in a killing run. The downdraft blasted the icy bracken flat and threw us over. Medea was low. So low. The gun servitors trained wing and chin turrets on the charging demon host. When they opened up, their firepower was so monumental, they vaporized it. The light went out. I pulled Beckwin to me as the drizzle of liquidized host form rained on us out of the cold night. I could hear Fishig calling my name. "Help her," I said to Fishig as I rose, and he scooped Beckwin up. I looked around. The place was littered with dead, most of them cultists. Inchabel had found Neve, lacerated but alive, 20 meters up the slope, and was calling for a medic. The aft thrusters of the gun cutter winked hot white in the night sky as Medea banked around out of her run to come down again. Nail, who had taken a flesh wound to the arm, leaned against the pylon and shut off his whirring cannon drum. We need to regroup," I said. "Agreed," said Fishig. "You have no idea what you're up against, do you?" asked Hussman. We all turned. The old skin hunter from Windhover was stalking down the moor slope towards us, his long las slung over one crooked arm. Fierce Graupel had begun to fleck down from the clouding sky. "Do you?" he hissed again. I felt Beckwin tense. It wasn't Hussman. Hussman looked at me. White light shone from his eyes. His voice was Profanity's. "Not the slightest clue," he said. "You can destroy my physical host, but you cannot break the links to the Master." "Hussman!" Inchabel cried. "Not here anymore. He was the most open mind, so I took him. He will serve for a while." I took a step forward. Hussman raised a hand. "Don't bother, Eisenhorn," said Profanity. "I could kill you all here, now. But what's about to happen is far more interesting." Hussman, his arms held out from his body and his head back, suddenly rose into the air, dropping his prized longlas. Steadily, he floated away into the sky until he had vanished over the moors into the dawn's counterglow. "What did he mean?" asked Beckwin. "I don't—" Floodlights mobbed over the rise, and we suddenly heard the clank of armored tracks. 20 Cadian APCs crested the brow, their floods beaming down at us. Cadian shock troops scrambled down the slope, covering us with their guns.
"What the hell?"
Nail cried. I was stunned. This was the last thing I had expected. "Inquisitor Eisenhorn," boomed a vox-amped voice from the lead APC. "For crimes against the Imperium, for the atrocity at Thracian, for consorting with demon hosts, you are hereby arrested and condemned to death." I recognized the voice. It was Ozma. Chapter 16. The Hammer of Witches. 3 months in the Carnificina. Flight from Cadia. Flanked by 6 robed interrogators reading aloud from the books of pain and the chapters of punishment, Inquisitor Leonid Ozma came down the moorland slope towards me. Pink dawn light was beginning to spear lengthways across the bleak heath, and the gorse and bracken was stirred by the early morning breeze. Distantly, heath grouse and tarkerns were whooping and calling to the midwinter sun. Ozma was a well-built, broad-shouldered man in his 150s. He wore brass power armor that glowed almost orange in the ruddy dawn. Ornate Malleus crests decorated his armor's bessagues and polions, and 6 purity seals were threaded around his beaver like a floral wreath. A long cloak of white fur played out behind him, brushing the tops of the heather and gorse. His face was blunt and pugnacious. His eyes were glinting dots set in puffy lids, fringed by heavy grey eyebrows. His bowl-cut hair was the colour of sword metal. Some years before, he had lost his lower jaw during a fight with a cornate berserker. The augmetic replacement was a jutting chin of chrome, linked into his skull by feed tubes and microservos. The emblem of the Inquisition rose above his head, on a standard mounted between his shoulder blades. In one hand he carried a power hammer, the mark of his ordo. In the other, a sealed ebony scroll tube. I recognized it at once. A carta extremis.
"This is insanity,"
Fishig growled. The Cadians around us stiffened and jabbed with their weapons. "Enough," I warned Fishig. I turned to my companions. They looked so lost, so miserable, so dismayed. "We will not fight our own," I told them. "Surrender your weapons. I will soon have this laughable error resolved." Bequin and Inchabel handed their weapons to the Cadian guards. Fishig reluctantly allowed the stormtroopers to divorce him from his riot gun. Nail unclipped his drum cannon's ammo feed, slid out the magazine box, and passed that to the waiting troops, leaving the disabled heavy weapon strapped around his torso on its harness. I nodded, satisfied. "Thornbid's Aegis, by cool water, soft," I whispered into my vox, and then turned to meet Ozma. He raised his power hammer in a brief gesture, and the mumbling interrogators fell silent and closed their books. "Gregor Eisenhorn," he said in precisely enunciated high formal Gothic, "in fealty to the God Emperor, our undying lord, and by the grace of the Golden Throne, in the name of the Ordo Malleus and the Inquisition, I call thee Diabolus, and in the testimony of thy crimes I submit this carta. May imperial justice account in all balance. The Emperor protects." I slid my storm gun out of its holster, ejected the clip, and handed it to him, grip first. "I hear full well thy charge and thy words, and make my submission," I responded, in the ancient form. "May imperial justice account in all balance. The Emperor protects. Dost thou accept this carta from my hand?" "I accept it into mine, for that I may prove it thrice false." "Dost thou state thy innocence now, at the going off?" "I state it true and clear. May it be so writ down." Vox drones idling by the shoulders of the interrogators had been recording all this, but the youngest interrogator was transcribing it all with a hollow quill into a dispositional slate suspended before him on a grav plate. I noted this detail with some satisfaction. Preposterous though the charges were, Ozma was prosecuting with total and precise formality. "I ask of thee thy badge of office," Ozma said. "I deny thy asking. By the code of prejudice, I declare my right to retain my rank until due process is concluded." He nodded. His language changed from high formal to low Gothic. "I expected as much. Thank you for avoiding unpleasantness." "I don't think I've avoided any unpleasantness, Ozma. What I have avoided is bloodshed. This is ridiculous." "They all say that," he muttered snidely, turning away. "No," I said levelly, stopping him dead. "The guilty and the polluted fight. They deny, they struggle. In my lifetime I have brought down 9 marked Diabolus. None went quietly. Mark that fact in your record," I said to the scribing interrogator. "If I was guilty, I would not be submitting to your process so politely." "Mark it so," Ozma told his hesitating scribe. He looked back at me. "Read the carta, Eisenhorn. You're guilty as sin. This show of understanding and cooperation is exactly what I would have expected from a being as canny and clever as you." "A compliment, Ozma." He spat into the bracken. "You are one of the best, Eisenhorn. Lord Rawkin actually pleaded for you. I acknowledge your past triumphs, but you have been turned. You are Malleus. You are an abomination, and you will pay."
"This is insane," Neve muttered, limping towards us.
"And none of your business, Inquisitor General," Ozma replied. Neve faced him, her torn armor wet with her own blood.
"This is my province, Inquisitor. Eisenhorn has proved himself to me. This charade is interfering with Inquisition business."
"Read the carta, Inquisitor General," Ozma told her, "and shut up. Eisenhorn is clever and convincing. He has fooled you, lady.
Be thankful that you're not implicated.
My companions were arraigned at Khazad-dûrth, under Neve's recognizance. No such luxury for me. I was flown south aboard a Cadian military lighter, through the dawn, to the furthest islet of the Caducades group, to the infamous Cadian prison, the Carnificina. They had fettered my hands and feet. I sat on a bracket bench dropped from the wall of the lighter's armoured hold, surrounded by Cadian guards, and read the Carta by the shifting light that sheared in through the window slits. I could scarcely believe what I was reading. "Well," grunted Fishig from his seat in the corner. I had been allowed one spokesman, and I had selected Fishig with his legal background. "Read it," I said, holding the Carta out to him. One of the impassive Cadians took it from me and passed it to the scowling Hubrusian. After a few moments spent reviewing the scroll, Fishig blurted out an incredulous profanity. "Just what I thought," I said. The Carnificina jutted up from the thrashing sea like the molar of a massive herbivore, the gum eaten away. It had not been built so much as hollowed out of the upthrust crag. There wasn't a wall on the prison aisle thinner than 5 meters. Vicious plunges broke in white spray around its granite base, and the western aspects were open to the worst of the pelagic abuse from the oceans beyond. Icebergs from the calving glaciers at Cadieu Sound and the distant Caducades Isthmus jostled and splintered in the open water between the prison isle and the barren atolls opposing it. Kelp and hardy, lean axle trees decorated its lower slopes. The lighter swung in over the eastern ramparts and settled on a pad cut from the stone. I was marched under guard out into the cold sunlight, and then into the dank hallways of the rock. The whitewashed walls sweated and stank of seawater. Rusting chains ran down from the ceiling to the hatches of forgotten oubliettes. I could hear the shouts and screams of prisoners. The demented and infected of the Cadians lived here, mostly ex-servicemen who had been driven mad in the wars of the Eye. The Cadian troops handed me over to a squad of red-uniformed prison guards who reeked of unwashed flesh and carried pain flails and leather whips. They opened up a 50-centimeter thick hatch cover, riven with studs, and pushed me into a cell. It was 4 paces by 4, cut from stone, with no window. It stank of piss. The previous incumbent had died here, and never been removed. I pushed aside his dry bones and sat on the wooden bunk. I knew nothing. I had no idea if the Cadian interior had captured that rogue starship, or if anyone had managed to track the flight of the thing that had been poor Hussman. The path to Quixos, the path we had been so lucky to strike at last, was disappearing by the second as we played these games, and there was nothing I could do about it. "When did you first decide to consort with demons?" asked Interrogator Rigri. "I have never done so, or decided to do so." "But the demon host Cherubael knows you by name," said Interrogator Palfir. "Is that a question?" Palfir stammered. "What is your relationship with the demon host Cherubael?" cut in Interrogator Moyag sternly. "I have no relationship with any demon host," I replied. I was chained to a wooden chair in the great hall of the Carnificina, winter sunlight shafting down from the high windows. Ozma's 3 interrogators stalked around me like caged beasts, their robes swirling in the draught. "It knows your name," Moyag said testily. "I know yours, Moyag. Does that give me power over you?" "How did you orchestrate the atrocity at Thracian Hive Primaris?" asked Palfir. "I didn't. Next question."
Do you know who did?
asked Rigri. "Not precisely, but I believe it was the being you have referred to. Cherubael. He has been in your life before." "I have thwarted him before. 100 years ago at 56 Izar. You must have the records." Rigri glanced at his colleagues before replying. "We do. But you have been searching for him ever since." "Yes, as a matter of duty. Cherubael is a repellent abomination. Do you wonder that I would seek him out?" "Not all your contacts with him have been recorded." "What?" "We know some contacts have remained secret," Moyag rephrased. "How?" "The sworn testimony of an Alan von Beig. He states that you sent an operative codenamed Hound out to make contact with Cherubael 1 year ago, and that you refrained from telling your Ordo master about it." "I didn't think to bother Lord Rawkin with the matter." "So, you don't deny it?" "Deny what?" Hunting for chaos? No, I don't.
In secret?
What Inquisitor doesn't work in secret?
Who is Hound?
Asked Palfear. I had no wish to make Fishig's life more difficult just then. I said, I don't know his real name. He works clandestinely. I thought they would press me, but instead Moyag said, Why did you survive the Thracian horror? I was lucky. Palfear walked a circle around me, his polished boots squeaking on the worn floor.
Let me make it clear. We are just beginning here. In respect to your rank and career, we are employing interrogation of the first action. The first action is—
I cut him short. I have been an Inquisitor for many years, Palfear. I know what the first action is. Verbal interview without duress.
Then you know of the third and fifth actions,
sneered Rigri. Light physical torture and psychic interrogation, and, by the way, you just utilize the second action, verbal threat of and or description of actions that may follow.
Have you ever been tortured, Eisenhorn?
Asked Moyag. Yes, by less squeamish men than you. And I have been interrogated too. Second action methods really won't work on me.
Inquisitor Ozma has authorized us to use any methods up to and including ninth action, spat Palfear.
Again, a threat. Second action. It won't work on me, I told you that. I'm trying to be cooperative.
Who is Hound?
Asked Rigri. Ah, there it was. The follow-up, designed to wrong foot by coming out of sequence. For a moment, I began to admire their interrogation skills. I don't know his real name. He works clandestinely.
Is it not Godwin Fishig, the man you chose as your second here? The man who waits outside this chamber?
There are times when the injuries Gorgon Lock did to my face on Gudrun have their benefits. My face simply couldn't show the reaction they were hoping to see. But inside I balked. Their intelligence was good enough to have cracked Glossia, if only partially. I was sure of the source. They had already mentioned that weasel von Beg. Months before, on Thracian, right before the atrocity, I had begun to suspect von Beg. At that time, I merely assumed he was Lord Rorken's plant, to watch over me. Now I realized he was happy to talk to anyone. I had recognized von Beg's weakness and stalled his career. Clearly he had decided to seek advancement from other Inquisitors by selling me out. If you are telling me Fishig is the operative I know as Hound, I am truly surprised, I replied levelly, choosing my words with extreme care.
We will talk to him in time,
said Palfear. Not while he is my recognized second. That would break the code of prejudice. If you wish to interview him, I must be allowed a new second, of my choosing.
We will get to that, said Rigri.
Why did you survive the Thracian horror? Asked Moyag. I was lucky. Explain, lucky. I had stopped to honor the tomb of the Admiral. The Spatian Gate protected me from the airstrikes. After the lies Cherubael had told me on Echan, I dreaded this question coming up again under psychic interview. The lies, or at least my attempts to screen them, would be picked up. The atrocity was simply cover to allow you to liberate and remove from Thracian the heretic psyker Esaradon. I would normally address that notion with scorn. If the entire event had been staged simply to launder the psyker, then it was inhumanly wasteful. However, I believe in some regards you are right. That's what the atrocity was engineered to do, but not by me. Moyag licked his yellowing teeth eagerly. You maintained that it was, in fact, Interrogator Lyko who executed the event. In collaboration with the demon host. But Lyko cannot answer those charges, can he? Because you killed him on Echan. I executed Lyko on Echan as a traitor enemy of the Imperium. I submit to you that you killed him because he was onto you. You killed him to silence him. Do I really have to be here? You're doing a fine job of making up your own answers. Where is Esaradon? Wherever Cherubael took him.
And where is that?
Asked Palfear. I shrugged. To his master. Quixos. All three of them laughed. Quixos is dead. He died long ago, Moyag chuckled. Then why did the Inquisitor General and I find that he had been manipulating her codes to gain access to Cadian airspace? Because that's how you made it look. You say Quixos used his power to steal her authority code. If that's true, then it's a crime any deviant Inquisitor of renown could manage. You could manage it, and using a dead man's code means no one is going to object. Quicksos isn't dead. I cleared my throat. Quicksos is hereticus and extremis diabolus. He has perverted inquisitors such as Lyco and Molitor into his service. He uses demon hosts. He triggers holocausts to cover his theft of Alpha Plus class psychers. The three interrogators fell silent for a moment. We are wasting time here, I said. I am not the man you want. But the time-wasting continued. A week passed, then a second. Every day I was taken to the Great Hall and subjected to anything from 2 to 6 hours of first-action interview. The questions were repeated so many times I became sick of hearing them. None of the interrogators seemed to listen to my statements. As far as I knew, no part of my story was being checked out. They were clearly wary of escalating to physical or psychic means of extraction. Because I was a psyker, I could at least make things difficult enough so that they'd never know how much of what they were getting out of me was true. Ozma had evidently decided to wear me down with endless cycles of verbal cross-examination. For 15 minutes each evening, with the ocean light fading, I was allowed to speak with Fischig. These conversations were pointless. The cell areas were undoubtedly laced with vox thieves and listening devices, and as far as we knew, Glossier was compromised. Fischig could tell me little, although I was able to learn that Medea, Amos, and the gun cutter were not in Ozma's hands, and neither was the SN. There had been no further sighting of Profanity Hussman, and Fischig was certain that the mystery starship that had delivered Profanity to Cadia had not been intercepted that fateful night. Through Fischig's agency, I sent petitions to Ozma, to Rorken, and to Neve, protesting my arrest and urging them to take further action regarding Quicksos. No word came back. Candlemas was long past. 3 more weeks went by. I realized that the year had turned. Outside the thick, bleak walls of the Carnificina, it was 3:40.M41. At the end of my 3rd month of detention and interrogation, I was led into the Great Hall for my daily interview and found Ozma waiting for me instead of the usual interrogators. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair in the center of the stark room. It was dark and cold. Bitter late winter storms were pushing in from the east, and though it was day, no light came from the high windows. They were muffled with snow. My breath steamed in the air, and I shivered. Ozma had arranged 6 lamps around the edges of the room. I sat down, pushing my hands into the pockets of my coat against the chill. I didn't want Ozma to see my distress. He stood, warm and insulated in his burnished power armor, reviewing a data slate. I could see myself reflected in the polished panels of his backplate. My clothes were ragged and filthy, my skin pale. I had dropped a good 7 kilos, and now sported a thick beard as unruly as my hair. The only item in my possession was the inquisitorial rosette in my coat pocket. It comforted me. Ozma turned to face me. "In 3 months your story has not changed. That should tell you something. It tells me you have great reserves of strength and a careful mind. Or that I'm not lying." He put the slate down on one of the lamp tables. "Let me explain to you what is going to happen. Lord Rorken has persuaded Grandmaster Orsini to have you extradited to Thracian Primaris. There you will stand trial for the charges in the Carta Extremis before a magistrate tribunal of the Ordo Malleus and the Officio of Internal Prosecution. Rorken isn't happy, but it is all Orsini would allow. Rorken, I have heard, feels that your innocence, or guilt, can be ascertained once and for all in a formal trial. The result of that trial may embarrass you and your master, Lord Béziers." He laughed. "In truth, I would welcome such embarrassment if it meant the exoneration of a valuable inquisitor like you, Eisenhorn. But I don't think it will. You will burn on Thracian for this, Eisenhorn, as surely as you would have done here." "I'll take my chances, Ozma." He nodded. "So will I. The black ships will arrive in 3 days' time to conduct you to Thracian Primaris. That gives me 3 days to break you before the matter is taken out of my hands. Be careful, Ozma." "I am always careful. Tomorrow my staff will begin 9th action examination of you. There will be no respite until the black ships arrive, or you tell me what I want to hear. 2 days of 9th action methods will probably guarantee I won't be alive when the black ships come. Probably. A shame.
and questions will be asked. But this is a lonely prison, and I am in charge. That is why today I'm just talking to you. Just you and me. A last chance. Tell me the whole truth now, Eisenhorn, man to man. Make this easy on us both. Confess your crimes before the pain begins tomorrow. Spare us the trial on Thracian, and I'll do everything in my power to ensure your execution is quick and painless. I'll gladly tell you the truth. His eyes brightened. It's all there, on that slate you were reading, exactly as I have been saying these last 3 months. When the guards took me back to my frigid cell, down stone hallways where the ocean gales moaned, Fischig was waiting for me. Our daily 15 minutes. He had brought a lamp and a tray with my night meal. Thin, tepid fish broth and stale hunks of rusk bread with a glass of watered rum. I sat down on the crude bunk. I'm to be extradited for trial, I told him. He nodded. But I understand tomorrow the pain work begins. I filed a protest, but I'm sure it'll be accidentally lost in the trash. I'm sure it will. You should eat, he said. I'm not hungry. Just eat. You'll need your strength, and from the look of you, you've precious little of that. I shook my head. Gregor, he said, dropping his voice, I have a question to ask you. You won't like it much, but it's important. Important? To me. And to your friends. Ask it. Do you remember, God Emperor, but it seems so long ago, last year, when we met up again, at that grave field outside ck3? Of course. In the shrine tower, you said to me that you couldn't conceive of doing anything that would please or benefit a demon. You said, I can't ever imagine myself that insane. I remember it clearly. You said that if you ever thought I was, you'd shoot me yourself. He nodded, with a sour chuckle. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the crackling of the lamp and the boom of the sea outside the prison ramparts. You want to be sure, don't you, Godwin? I asked. He looked at me, reproachfully. I can understand that. I expect total loyalty from you and all my staff. You have the right to be assured of the same from me. Then you know my question. I fixed him with my eyes. You want to ask if I'm lying, if there's any truth to the charges, if you have been working for a man who consorts with demons. It's a stupid question, I know. If you are those things, you won't hesitate to lie again now. I'm too tired for anything but the truth, Godwin. I swear, by the Golden Throne, I am not what Ozma says I am. I am a true servant of the Emperor and the Inquisition. Find me an eagle, and I'll swear on that, too. I don't know what else I can do to convince you. He got to his feet. That's enough for me. I just wanted to be sure. Your word has always been enough, and after all the years we've been together, I was sure that you'd tell me if... even if it was... Know this, old friend, I would. Even if I was the scum Ozma believes me to be, and even if I could hide it from him, I couldn't lie to a direct question from you. Not you, Chastener Fischig. The guard rapped on the cell door. 1 minute more, Fischig shouted. Eat your supper, he said to me. Did Ozma put you up to this? I asked. Hell no, he snarled, offended. It's all right. I didn't think so. The guard hammered again. All right, damn your eyes, Fischig growled. I'll see you tomorrow, I said. Yeah, he replied. Do one thing for me. Name it. Eat your supper. The cramps began just after what I guessed was midnight. They woke me from a bad sleep. Pain surged through my body and my mind was numb. I hadn't felt this bad since Pye's handiwork on Lethe 11, during the dark night almost 2 whole years before. I tried to rise and fell off the bunk. Spasms racked me, and I cried out. I vomited up the dregs of the dire supper. Bouts of fever heat and death chill twitched through me. I don't know how long it took for me to crawl to the cell door, or how long I lay there, beating my fists against it until it opened. Hours, possibly. Consciousness ebbed and flowed with the cramping and the rising agony.
Holy Emperor!
The guard exclaimed as he opened the door and saw me by the light of his rush lamp. He called out, and feet came beating down the cellway.
He's sick,
I heard the guard say. Leave him till morning, said another.
He'll be dead,
the first guard answered nervously.
please,
I stammered, reaching out my hand. It was frozen in a claw shape, paralyzed and ugly. Others were arriving. I heard Fishig's voice.
He needs a doctor. Trained Medicae help, Fishig said.
It's not allowed, complained the guard.
Look at him, man. He's dying. An attack of some sort.
Let me through, said another voice. It was the prison medic, accompanied by Interrogator Rigri, who looked as if he had been roused from his bed.
He's faking it. Leave him, Rigri said contemptuously. Shut up, Fishig snarled. Look at him. That's no act. He's a master of deception, Rigri returned. Maybe he's been licking the lead paint off the door to aid his act. More fool him. This is a sham. Leave him. He's dying, said Fishig.
He looks bloody sick, said a guard uncomfortably. More cramping spasms twisted me involuntarily. The doctor was hunched over me. I could hear the beeping of the Medicae Auspex he'd taken from his pharmacopoeia.
This is no act, he muttered. His body's in seizure. You can't fake muscle binding like that. Blood oxygen is down to 30% and his heart is defibrillating. He'll be dead in less than an hour.
Give him a shot. Fix him, Rigri yelled.
I can't, sir. Not here. We haven't got the facilities. Oh, Emperor, look. He's bleeding out now, from the eyes and nose.
Do something, Rigri screamed.
We have to get him to an infirmary. Khazad is the nearest. We have to get him there quickly or he's dead.
That's ridiculous, Doctor, said Rigri. You must be able to do something.
Not here.
Call up a flight, Rigri, Fishig said. He's a primary-level prisoner of the Inquisition. We can't just take him out of here. Then get Ozma. He's gone back to the mainland for the night.
Fishig's voice was low.
Are you going to be the one to tell Ozma you let his prize captive die on the floor of his cell? No. I'll tell him then. I'll tell Ozma that his man Rigri cheated him out of the greatest prosecution of his career because he couldn't be bothered to authorize transport, and thus let Eisenhorn die of toxic shock in this prison stack. Call up transport, Rigri shouted at the guards. Now!
They carried me up the stone-cut landing pad on a stretcher. Voices yelled and argued in the biting wind and blizzard-filled darkness. The medic had fixed up an intravenous drip and was trying to slow my symptoms with a few drugs from his kit. The pad lights flickered on, cold and white, and backlit the swirling snow into black dots. Acadian shuttle came in low, its attitude thrusters shaking the pad and swirling the snowfall in random directions. They carried me into the green-lit interior, and the worst of the cold and weather was stolen away as the hatch shut. I felt the sudden yaw of the ship as we lifted up and turned away towards the mainland. Fishig loomed over me, adjusting the restraining straps that held me into the shuttle's cot. Over the roar of the engines, I could hear Rigri shouting at the pilot. Covertly, Fishig slid an injector vial from his coat and fixed it into the intravenous rig in place of the prison doctor's injector. I began to feel better almost at once.
Stay still and breathe slowly, Fishig whispered, and hold on tight. Things are about to get bumpy.
Contact, 3 kilometers and coming in hard, I heard the co-pilot blurt.
What the hell is that?
Rigri demanded. There was a pinging sound from the shuttle's transponder.
Throne of Earth! They've got a target lock on us!
Exclaimed the pilot.
Attention, shuttle, a voice crackled over the open Vox. Set down on the islet, west 52 by 36. Now, or I will shoot you out of the air.
My vision was settling now. I looked across the green-lit cabin and saw Rigri pull a las pistol.
What treachery is this?
He asked, looking at Fishig.
I think you should do as you were asked, and set down right now, said Fishig calmly.
Rigri made to fire the pistol, but there was a searing flash of light. Fishig burned Rigri with a blast from the digi-weapon built into the Jokero-made ring on his right index finger. An item of Maxilla's jewelry, I realized. Fishig fired another shot that vaporized the Vox system.
Down,
he ordered the pilot, pointing the ring at him. The shuttle made emergency groundfall in a snowstorm on the rocky beach of the uninhabited islet.
Hands on your heads,
Fishig ordered the crewman as he bundled me out of the hatch and into the blizzard. I could barely walk, and he had to support me.
You poisoned me,
I gasped.
I had to make it convincing. Amos prepared a dose that would reactivate the binary poison in your body. Pi's poison. You bastards. Huh. A man who can curse is far from dead. Come on.
He half-carried me across the shingle into the oceanic gale, snowflakes stinging our faces. Lights swooped down ahead of us as the gun cutter came in, executing a perfect Betancourt-style landing on the icy shingle. Fishig bundled me up the landing ramp into the arms of Bequin and Inchabel.
"Dear Lord, have you thought this through?" I wheezed.
"Of course we have," Bequin snapped. "Nathan, get a booster shot of anti-venin." For the second time in under 2 years, I was dead. From binary poison at the hands of Beldame Sadia's henchmen on Lethe, and now dead in a shuttle crash, brought down in a winter storm over the caducades on Cadia. The gun cutter lofted from the beach, ran the length of it, and then came back towards the downed shuttle. May the Emperor forgive me and my staff for the deaths of Rigri and the 2 flight crew. Their deaths were the only way I could maintain my security.
Fire,
I heard Nail tell Medea. The gun cutter's ordnance strafed the Cadian shuttle and blew it apart. By dawn, the jetsam along the remote islet's shore would suggest nothing but a tragic crash caused by the hellish storms. We banked up through the cover of the storms towards orbital space. Though no one told me, I knew our flight plan was covered by someone else's authority code. Neves was my guess, probably with her permission. The SN was waiting for us. "Now what?" I asked Fishig, hoarsely.
"Damn it, I've risked everything I count dear to get you this far," he replied. "I was kind of hoping you'd know what to do now."
"Kinchair," I said. "Tell Maxilla to get us to Kinchair." There are some secrets that are worth keeping.
"What's at Kinchair?"
Bequin asked. "An old friend," I said.
Not a friend, exactly, added Amos.
"No, Amos is right. An old associate."
2 old associates, to be specific,
Amos added. Bequin pulled a particularly angry face.
"You pair and your old intimacies. Why don't you ever give a straight answer?"
"Because the less you know, the less the Inquisition can harm you, if we're caught," I said.
the new lean you.
Syruped Maxilla as I walked onto the SN's bridge. I had shaved away my beard, had my ragged hair clipped back, and dressed in a suit of black linen after my shower. I was still terribly weak on my feet, and in no mind for Maxilla's foolery.
"Course is set for Kinchair," Maxilla said stiffly,
apparently recognizing my mood. His gold-masked servitors chimed in agreement. His hooded navigator, all senses fixed on some different, quite other place, said nothing. "I have a question," said Inchabel. He was seated at secondary navigation position, reviewing the star maps. "Why Kinchair? A mining world out in the edges of the segmentum, almost a halo star. I thought we'd be trying to find Quixos. There's no point." "What?" Maxilla and Inchabel asked, almost in unison. I sat down on a padded leather seat. Why make the endeavor to find Quixos when he would surely kill us at a stroke? We've barely survived individual encounters with 2 of his demon hosts. We haven't the strength to fight him." "So?" asked Inchabel. "So the first thing we do is find the strength. Prepare. Arm ourselves. Make ourselves ready to take down one of the most powerful evils in the Imperium." "And for that we need to go to Kinchair?" Inchabel whispered. "Kinchair's the start, Nathan," I said. "Trust me." Chapter 17. Rogue Star. Dr. Savine, Cora, and Mr. Horn. In the Annex. Even at full warp, it took the SN 30 weeks to reach Kinchair.